Hello, hi, how are we doing? Oh my god, my allergies have been so terrible today. If I sound sniffly, then that's why. So, I thought today would be just as good a day as any to talk about this book that I've been meaning to do, not necessarily a review of, but more of kind of like an outline of the concepts that I saw in this book, because honestly I think they're revolutionary. I don't know if I will ever in my lifetime get to teach this book like as part of a class or something. I would love to, because this is the kind of book that starts a renaissance, and that book is All About Love by Bell Hooks. This is basically, Bell Hooks, if you don't know, is one of the most well-known feminist philosophers of our time. So this book is basically about creating new visions for love. She posits that we have a massive problem in America right now, and that problem is chronic lovelessness. So people are not living their lives based on a love ethic, which I'll explain a little bit later in this video. But this chronic lovelessness, I should say, is not the same thing as like chronic singleness, right? It's much worse than that, actually. It's like people, a majority of children, she posits, grow up in families without love. They might have care and they might have some forms of affection. They might have their needs taken care of, but that is not the same thing as love. People without close friendships. People who are in relationships but that don't have love in those romantic relationships. Like people who don't have self-love, who don't perform their work with love, who don't show love through making art. So what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna go through chapter by chapter in this and point out some of the things that I personally saw as very helpful or insightful. I'm really, like this year, I really want to focus on healing. I'll talk about this probably in a later video, but I feel like dealing with this and dealing with issues of lovelessness in my own life is gonna be central to that healing, right? Because this, like, I don't know about anyone watching this, but like this is my biggest wound. Like this is the wound that I can't stop touching, right? Like this is the thing that I have, whenever I'm at my most depressed, like that's what my depression keeps telling me is, look how bad things are, not just for you, but for the entirety of the world. Like how many people go through their entire lives not knowing love. And I think what I'm gonna do is I want to define love first, as she defines love. So her definition is, love is the will to extend oneself for the purpose of nurturing one's own or another's spiritual growth. And I think it's really important that we define love just so that we're all on the same page throughout this video. So when I'm talking about love, this is the definition of love. Like, this is what I mean by love, not any cultural definition of love. She also points out that love and lack of love does not mean that there was no care whatsoever present, right? So she says a lack of sustained love does not mean the absence of care, affection, or pleasure. In fact, my long-term romantic relationships, like the bonds in my family, have been so full of care that it would be quite easy to overlook the ongoing emotional dysfunction. And this is like a really common thing in like dysfunctional families, right? Is like, you know, what do you mean you don't feel loved? Like, you have everything taken care of. Like, you know, we are nice to you sometimes, right? But that isn't the same thing as love being present. And I think by her pointing this out, it makes it a lot clearer why so many people with supposedly like good home lives have so much ongoing sustained emotional damage from those, right? Because it's like there's a lack of clarity about, well, why do I feel this way? Am I just crazy? Am I just a bad person? Like, no, it's very likely that if you feel like you had a perfectly fine childhood, but you at the same time have these really kind of deep, lurking emotional scars around your childhood, like stuff that to this day really gets you worked up, there's a chance that you might have had a caring household and you might have had a pleasurable childhood. You might have had everything you wanted, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you were loved and you were having your love needs met. A lot of us just come from legacies of lovelessness. So it's not really our family's fault and it's not really our parents' fault, because nobody, again, up until this point, has talked about this issue. Undoubtedly, many of us are more comfortable with the notion that love can mean anything to anybody, precisely because when we define it with precision and clarity, as I just did, it brings us face to face with our lacks, with terrible alienation. The truth is, far too many people in our culture do not know what love is. And this not knowing feels like a terrible secret, a lack we have to cover up. I think a lot of us have this idea, right, that everybody's in love or has love, some kind of love, friendship, family, whatever, except for us. And we feel like this should be the norm, right? It should be the norm. I think that's why we think everyone has it but us, is because that's what feels like the norm. The alternative, that most people do not know what love is and do not have love, or do not have sustained love, that's far more terrifying, because that shows that there's a cultural problem. And I think that that's more accurate, but it is a really, really uncomfortable truth. And I think that's why it's really, really uncomfortable for us to define love. It's much easier for us to think of it as this magical, uncatchable, subjective thing, rather than actually confront the problems with lack of love in our culture. So Bell Hooks kind of goes on to define love as an action. She says, "To begin by always thinking of love as an action rather than a feeling is one way in which anyone using the word in this manner automatically assumes accountability and responsibility. We are often taught we have no control over our feelings, yet most of us accept that we choose our actions, that intention and will inform what we do. We also accept that our actions have consequences." So this is one of my favorite things that she does in this book. She defines love as an action that you take. And this, basically in one sweep, solves the problem of people being like, oh, he hits me, but he loves me. If love is an action, then it doesn't matter what he feels on the inside when he hits you, right? Feelings don't matter. You can be infatuated with someone, but that doesn't mean that you love them. You can be obsessed with someone, that doesn't mean you love them. You can feel great pain when somebody is gone, but that doesn't mean you love them. What shows that you love someone is if you're gonna hold their hair back while they vomit, right? If you're not gonna be annoyed with them when they throw up in your car. Or if you'll be annoyed, but you will treat them kindly anyway, right? Or, yeah, if you are gonna comfort them when they've had a bad day, even though you've also had a bad day, that is an act of loving, right? So I think by treating love as an action that we take, we're able to take responsibility. And I personally don't think that any healing can ever happen if we don't take responsibility for ourselves. I don't think our nation can heal from lovelessness, or the world can heal from lovelessness, if we do not start thinking of love in this way, as an action which we take towards certain people. It's a choice that we take towards the people that we want in our lives, that we have feelings for, whether people that we're friends with, people in our family, people that we have romantic, sexual feelings towards, right? So then chapter 2 is called Justice. This is childhood love lessons. She talks a lot here about how many children in the United States grow up without love. And she says, Although lots of children are raised in homes where they are given some degree of care, love may not be sustained or even present, right? So this goes back to what I'm saying about how many people that had good childhoods, like they were safe, they were, they were taken care of. They had a lot of toys, they had play dates with their friends, they never had to worry about their parents beating them. All of this stuff is, and first of all, it's really important to remember that like one generation ago, it was normal to beat your kids bloody, right? So we have to keep that in mind when we think about where is this lovelessness coming from. It's like, well, no wonder, like one generation ago, it was normal to traumatize your children in childhood and to teach, which is a very ineffective method of teaching. Psychology shows, the results have been replicated. It's not an effective mode of teaching. So, so we have to keep that in mind when we're thinking about, well, where is this lovelessness coming from? Well, people have been kind of conditioned into lovelessness. Just one generation ago, it was like every single person was being conditioned into lovelessness. Yeah, and it's basically talking about how one way that we can kind of improve the lovelessness epidemic is by raising our children with more love, raising our children with respect and compassion, because children, I really don't understand why so many people of like our generation are just like mean to kids. Part of the reason why it's so traumatic to be in a loveless situation as a kid is because you don't really have the mental capacity to make sense of your situation, right? And then you also are effectively your parents' property. You have no human rights of your own, or barely any. And if your situation is wrapped up in adult issues, that can be really, really traumatic and confusing, because your pain is going to be of too great a depth for you to handle. No matter like what degree of stuff you're healing from, it's really important to be compassionate to like your younger self when you're thinking back on it, right? Because really we all did the best that we could, like your childhood self did the best that he or she could. So you really can't beat yourself up for carrying this pain into adulthood. But it is important that as adults, as capable adults, we learn how to handle it, just kind of out of kindness for our younger selves. Okay, so this next chapter is called Honesty. And this is about, it talks a lot about patriarchy and a lot about lying. She says, regardless of the intensity of the male masquerade, inwardly many men see themselves as the victims of lovelessness. Like everyone, they learned as children to believe that love would be present in their lives. Although so many boys are taught to behave as though love does not matter, in their hearts they yearn for it. That yearning does not go away simply because they become men. Lying, as one form of acting out, is a way they articulate ongoing rage at the failure of love's promise. To embrace patriarchy, they must actively surrender the longing to love. Patriarchy basically destroys men's ability to love, or rather encourages them to destroy it themselves. And this one was kind of gut-wrenching to read. I think I gained a lot of empathy for, obviously women are the primary victims of patriarchy, right? We are the ones being sex trafficked. We are the ones being raped. We are the ones being killed. I think it's something like 270 women are killed every hour by men, worldwide. We are the ones being brutalized on camera and then having those videos uploaded online for men to condition themselves into feeling pleasure at our pain. Yeah, so obviously I'm not saying that like, oh, men are the real victims here, because I hate when feminists say that. It's like, well, ladies, class consciousness when. Fellas, if you're watching this, like, you're getting screwed by patriarchy, right? Patriarchy encourages, it basically encourages kind of a permanent cognitive dissonance in men, right? It's like you are supposed to lie to avoid emotional responsibility at all costs, right? If your girlfriend tells you, hey, this thing you said made me upset, what you're supposed to say is, oh, I didn't mean it like that. Oh, I never said that. I never said that. Oh, you're blowing it out of proportion. Because when we do that, you win, basically, right? It makes it less likely that she will trust her gut and continue to be upset with you. Less likely that she will trust herself that actually happened and possibly leave you, right? It's a strategy to keep her with you. All of this, all of the stuff that men are encouraged to do to surrender love is in the name of power, right? Men under patriarchy are encouraged to basically trample their impulse to love in the race for power. It's really fucked because a lot of men that are buying into all this patriarchal stuff, right? And are every day taking steps to kill their ability to love. At the same time, they feel awful. They feel like shit. They're like, well, why does nobody love me? Why is there no love in my life? Why do I feel so hollow on the inside? This book, like seriously, if that resonates with you at all, read this. Because this is not, again, I feel like, and this shouldn't need to be said, right? But when we're criticizing patriarchy, we're not criticizing men as individuals, although every individual is responsible for his or her choices, obviously. We're criticizing this system that fucks us all over, and that is basically responsible for the lovelessness epidemic. So she goes on to say, patriarchal masculinity requires of boys and men not only that they see themselves as more powerful and superior to women, but that they do whatever it takes to maintain their controlling position. So this is where the lying comes in. This is one of the reasons men, more so than women, use lying as a means of gaining power in relationships. She also goes forward to say, though, that patriarchy also encourages women to lie to men to gain power, or the illusion of power, at least, right? Which is why a lot of women that buy into traditional femininity believe it's okay to regularly tell your male partner white lies, because it's their way of parrying, right? Like, it's their way of regaining or getting the illusion of regaining a little bit of power. And also lying to yourself. Like, it's not just like, I'm gonna lie to my girlfriend, it's also, I'm gonna lie to myself about the validity of my girlfriend's claims. And then she goes on to say, it's no accident that greater cultural acceptance of lying in this society coincided with women gaining greater social equality. So basically, lying became more culturally acceptable once the feminist movement started really gaining power. And this is because even the wealthiest professional woman can be brought down by being in a relationship where she longs to be loved and is consistently lied and gaslighted to. While much cultural attention is given to domestic violence, and practically everyone agrees it is wrong for men to hit women as a way of subordinating us, most men use psychological terrorism as a way to subordinate women. This is a socially acceptable form of coercion. When men lie to women, presenting a false self, the terrible price they pay to maintain power over us is the loss of their capacity to give and receive love. When she says most men use psychological terrorism against women, it's not even entirely intentional. So basically, if you're not taking conscious steps towards rejecting patriarchy, which means questioning why you think some things, privately changing small actions in your day-to-day, things like giving up pornography, not encouraging women when they talk about wanting plastic surgery or dieting or blah, 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 and just kind of privately changing your views on women. If you're not taking conscious steps to do that, basically, then it's very likely you are unconsciously using this psychological terrorism on women. And it's very strong language, I think, but it needs to be strong, in my opinion, because I honest to God think that but some of the most toxic men that I've ever known in my life, like people that gave me the scars that have made me need to go on this kind of healing journey, right? A lot of them genuinely are just completely unself-aware. They're not doing they're not treating women like shit as like a mwahaha, like I'm going to enforce the patriarchy today. Like hell yeah. Like it's not like that. They don't like because to them it's just normal. Like the things that they're doing in their mind are completely justified. Oh, three ducks just flew overhead. Oh my gosh, they're quacking so loudly. And the reason that she says that when you choose this desire for power over love, you essentially relinquish your ability to love, is because you can't love somebody while at the same time subordinating them. I don't really think that you can love someone while at the same time thinking that they're beneath you. And I mean that as in love, as in the action love, right? How are you going to consult your girlfriend for help with a personal problem if you think that all women are dumbasses, right? Or if you don't really think that she's gonna have anything useful to say, right? That act of love, of confiding in somebody and letting that somebody help you, is completely closed off to you because you think that that person is lesser than you, right? Things like decorating your future home with somebody, right? If you think you've got better taste than someone, and if you think that all the stuff she likes is freaking stupid because it's feminine and dumb, then you're not going to be able to make that space truly yours and hers, right? And even stuff like with friends. If you are counting down to the dime every time you buy your friend something, that's not love. Love is when you buy them whatever, a dumb shamrock shake or something, and you say, hey, don't worry about it. If you've never experienced that kind of thing, I would encourage you to at least fake it for a little bit and see the kind of feelings that that gives you inside. Because there's it's kind of like a calm, I think, when you stop thinking yourself so superior to people and you kind of surrender a little bit to the possibility that that person might be someone that you love. Yeah, and just not worrying about conditions as well. If whenever you're doing something nice for your girl, you're tallying it up in your head and you're like, well, she owes me this, this, and this now. Like, that's not love. Because part of the joy of being in a relationship, right, is getting to do that nice stuff. Like, that is part of the joy of it. I think you close yourself off from a lot of beauty, right? And if you're constantly lying to your partner and to yourself, you will never be at peace with yourself. You'll never be able to heal from your own issues. We cannot heal if we're not honest with ourselves. You know, the darkest shit in your heart, like the darkest, like the deepest scars, that shit you can heal from if you're honest with yourself. But if you don't drop lying and you don't drop the ego that lying protects, it's impossible for you to ever feel love for yourself, true love, and true love for other people. She goes on to say, loving justice between a man and a woman does not stand a chance when other men's manhood matters more. When the man has decided to love manhood and other guys' approval of him more than justice, there are predictable consequences in all his relationships with women. Learning to live as a man of conscience means deciding that your loyalty to the people whom you love is always more important than whatever lingering loyalty you may sometimes feel to other men's judgment on your manhood. I think this wasn't Hooks. This was someone named Stoltenberg. I think that might be a he, actually. I'll put the book that this is from up here. Yeah, so I think that that's pretty self-explanatory, right? Like, if you are chasing approval of not necessarily individual men, right? Like not necessarily Jerry from down the street. It's kind of this invisible, like, male gaze that you're trying to satisfy. The same as how women walk around trying to please an invisible male gaze, right? This is why a lot of women can't sit around our house without makeup even. Because we're pleasing an invisible male gaze. It doesn't necessarily mean we're pleasing some guy. And the same goes with men acting masculine. Well, I would assume it's the same. Even when you're alone worrying, like, does this shit look gay? Like, does this shit make me look effeminate? Am I being a pussy? Am I being a simp? Am I being a wimp? She goes on to say, widespread cultural acceptance of lying is a primary reason many of us will never know love. It is impossible to nurture one's own or another's spiritual growth when the core of one's being and identity is shrouded in secrecy and lies. Trusting that another person, really trusting that another person, always intends your good, having a core foundation of loving practice, cannot exist within the context of deception. We know how prevalent lying is in the media. I mean, it's just, all governments are somewhat propagandic, but, like, ours, like, in America especially, is pretty bad. And oh my god, during the Biggest Loser's reign of terror, it was really bad. And, I think a lot of us felt a little bit like we're going insane. And that's what it feels like to be constantly lied to and gaslighted, right? So then she has a chapter on commitment, which is kind of about committing to love in our lives, right? And honoring love through the commitments that we make. And one of the ways she talks about that is seeking work that we love. However, in this current society, a lot of us don't have the luxury of doing work that we love as our day job, right? And this is something that I've already started implementing, right? So she says, if you can't do a job that you love, do a good job. Just try to do your job well, so that you can be proud of what you've done at the end of the day. And if you at least do that, then you will feel like you've nurtured something in yourself and like you've done yourself justice. Those of us who don't have the luxury of doing something we love for 8 hours a day, 40 hours a week, then that's one way that you can implement that. And I've honestly found this so accurate. Like, if you just give work the focus that it's due, and you just do a good job at it, you give it your full attention for 8 hours a day, and then you log off and that's it, you actually feel a lot better about yourself at the end of the day, and you feel like you haven't betrayed yourself by doing a poor job. And I like to think about it as, like, throughout all of history, everybody has had to do some work that they didn't like, even if we were all living in little huts in the woods and it was 10,000 BC, there would still be jobs that we didn't like doing. And, it's just part of life. You just gotta do some work you don't want to do sometimes. And that's, like, totally fine. So, all right. So this next chapter here is values. And this had some really interesting shit in it. Talking to a university audience recently, I expressed my faith in the power of white people to speak out against racism, challenging and changing prejudice, empathetically stating that we can all change our minds and our actions. I stressed that this faith was not rooted in a utopian longing, but rather that I believe this because of our nation's history of the many individuals who have offered their lives in the service of justice and freedom. When challenged by folks who claimed that these individuals were exceptions, I agreed. But I then talked about the necessity of changing our thinking so that we see ourselves as being like the one who does change, rather than among those who refuse to change. What made these individuals exceptional was not that they were any smarter or kinder than their neighbors, but that they were willing to live the truth of their values. So one way that we can implement a love ethic in our day-to-day lives is, okay, you say you're woke, you think racism is bad, you think sexism is bad, you think homophobia is bad, then let your actions reflect that, right? How many people are walking around calling themselves feminists, but they still watch pornography? Abandon cognitive dissonance, right? If you want to live a life based off love, right? You want to help people who are downtrodden and stepped over in this society, you've got to take actions in your day-to-day life that reflect that, right? You say you love the planet? Well, what are you doing to help the planet, right? And doing this is gonna help your self-worth, right? It's gonna make you feel so much better about yourself and so much more at peace with the state of things, because you now know that you are part of the solution, not the problem. And it makes it harder for other people to hurt your feelings, I've found too, when you're taking concrete action. Like, no one can accuse me of being a bigot anymore, because I'm like, every day I wake up and I make sure that my actions are in accordance with my beliefs, right? I'm no, mama didn't raise a coward, right? So you really just have to embrace your inner hero or heroine, and you have to be willing to stand up for people. It's amazing the things that just people that I know as casual acquaintances or friends can, stand up for people in their day-to-day lives. It's not your job to fix the entire world, right? No one can do that. No one can fix all the hatred in the world. No one can fix climate change alone. Nobody can fix sexism. No one can fix racism all alone, right? But if every single one of us merely acts in accordance with the values that we claim to have, and does so not from a place of wanting clout or to be seen as better, holier than thou or whatever, if you do this merely because you're coming from a place of compassion, then, and this is critical because a lot of liberals, they'll do this but without compassion, right? And it lets them get swept up in ultimately waves of canceling and hatred and blah, blah, blah that are driven just by vitriol and boredom, I think. So it has to be coming from a place of careful compassion. And if you do that, I guarantee you're gonna start to feel a little bit better. I had to get changed because I was getting too hot in that turtleneck. Don't y'all love that time of the year where it's like, you start the day with a sweater because it's 20 degrees, and then by the end of the day it's 60 degrees and you're roasting like a pig. So then in this chapter she goes on to say, she talks about how our culture is one of domination. Cultures of domination rely on the cultivation of fear as a way to ensure obedience. In our society, we make much of love and say little about fear, yet we are all terribly afraid most of the time. Current anxiety epidemic. As a culture, we are obsessed with the notion of safety, yet we do not question why we live in states of extreme anxiety and dread. As fear is a very effective way of controlling the masses, right? Because in our biology, it's rooted in our biology for us to focus more on what causes us fear than what causes us happiness. This is why you can remember that dumb thing that you said in 3rd grade. Stop calling me when I'm trying to film. Yes, I do film on my phone. You can probably tell. Yeah, this is why you can remember that dumb thing you said back in 3rd grade, but you can't remember all the nice things your teachers told you, right? Unless they were utterly spectacular. This is why everything you see in the media is like made to generate fear. It's framed to generate more fear, right? Because that's what catches our attention, right? You can't resist clicking on it. And yeah, it's basically because we're wired to be like, well, I want to know if there's a tiger in those bushes, so I'd better investigate, right? And that translates to, I'm going to click on this article that is worded in an incredibly inflammatory way, because it's freaking me out. Just today, I was freaking out because I saw like an article I saw like a news video recommended on my YouTube feed. It was basically framed as like, okay, this is January 6th, part 2, right? And I was like, what the fuck? Like I was freaking out. I was like, and so I looked it up and I found out that it was nothing like that. And it also inhibits us from collaborating with each other, right? If we're all scared of our neighbors, we're not going to be able to go on a rent strike with our neighbors, right? Because we won't trust them. So it's really, really effective at keeping us obedient. Mass media dwells on and perpetuates an ethic of domination and violence because our image makers have more intimate knowledge of these realities than they have with the realities of love. We all know what violence looks like, but we don't all know what love looks like. And I was thinking about this, and this is even true in books, right? We often write about love going wrong. But when I think about it, I'm like, we can write about violence and extreme death. And we can write about a lack of love in extreme depth. But who's writing about love itself in extreme death? And the only person that I could think of that has done this is Jane Austen. Because all of her books are these incredibly, like, everything is about the interpersonal relationships of the characters to each other. And some characters might be annoying, but everything is based around having kind of this grace which we behave towards other people with. In every novel she wrote, basically, she was like, the best thing that a possible male suitor can be is kind and honest and earnest. And, you know, some Jane Austen fan might correct me if I'm wrong, but, you know, when I think about the Mr. Knightleys and the Mr. Darcys of the world, it's like they all represent people who, like, could be, like, existing within an ethic of love. Well, maybe not Mr. Darcy, because he's a train wreck. The thing about Mr. Darcy, though, is that he does apologize. Like, he does admit his wrongs, right? And that really is kind of, I think, important when we're, like, thinking about this, is that, you know, we all live under these systems and nobody can be perfect, right? Like, when we're saying you should operate based on an ethic of love, that doesn't mean hold yourself to an impossible purity standard. But it does mean not to betray your heart with your everyday actions as an act of kindness towards yourself. We're not doing this to compensate for secretly believing we are evil and bad and dirty. We are walking towards love because we know that that will satisfy this deep longing within our hearts. She goes on to say, even though some individual scholars try to tell us there is no direct connection between images of violence and the violence confronting us in our lives, the common sense truth remains. We are all affected by the images we consume and by the state of mind we are in when watching them. If consumers want to be entertained, and the images shown us as entertaining are images of violent dehumanization, it makes sense that these acts become more acceptable in our daily lives, and that we become less likely to respond to them with moral outrage or concern. Were we all seeing more images of loving human interaction, it would undoubtedly have a positive impact on our lives. Like, think about, like, the films that you've seen. Like, have you ever seen a film that portrayed loving human interaction? I feel like the credits roll before we get to see that. Like, somebody is calling me again. Shut up, bro. All of it is spam calls. I literally get so many spam calls. It's... yeah, whatever. My phone's blowing up. As usual. Yeah, like, even with things like romantic comedies, right? Once they get together, the credits roll. So we don't really get to see sustained loving dynamics that much. But yeah, no, even in, like, Disney movies, it's like a lot of them are portraying this kind of like undefined idea of romance. Like, it's this magical thing that just happens one day. Media gives us this idea that love is either a thing that you are given when you've completed your heroic journey, right? This furthers the idea to young men specifically that one day a girlfriend will fall from the sky and make everything in their life perfect once they've achieved some unidentifiable goal. Maybe like growing up or something. I don't know. Fellas, I don't know what they're telling you implicitly or suggesting, but I think that is generally it. Like, it's expected that you're gonna get a woman like as a thing to have, as like a reward, and another person is never a reward or a punishment for you. Women too, though, are kind of taught that one day some random bro is just gonna like come and sweep us off our feet and make everything in our lives perfect, and everything will be great from that point on. And those ideas about love are very, very harmful. It like kind of falsely gives the idea that love is like a car or a house. Yeah, like treating your husband or your wife as like a possession that you have to signify your adulthood. Love and consumerism are not super compatible. All right, so next she talks about greed. Something I thought was fascinating is she basically says that for a while, love was actually much more prolific and accepted in American society. Prior to the Vietnam War, a hopeful vision of justice and love had been evoked by the civil rights struggle, the feminist movement, and sexual liberation. However, by the late 70s, after the failure of radical movements for social justice aimed at making the world a democratic, peaceful place where resources could be shared and a meaningful life could become a possibility for everyone, folks stopped talking about love. The loss of lives at home and abroad had created economic plenty while leaving in its wake devastation and loss. Americans were asked to sacrifice the vision of love, freedom, and justice, and put in its place the worship of materialism and money. This vision of society upheld the need for imperialistic war and injustice. Very convenient for the government, for the powers that be, people that killed their soul a long time ago. Again, this is like a handful of people we're talking about. Very powerful, very wealthy people. It's helpful that she traces it back to a point in time, right? It's helpful to root this in history so that you know this isn't someone just waxing poetic, right? Like, this is somebody who has studied the history, who has lived through a lot of the history, right? And is basing this off of her own observations of what has happened in our culture. So, and then she goes on to talk about greed in love. Many people want love to function like a drug, giving them an immediate and sustained high. They want to do nothing, just passively receive the good feeling. In patriarchal culture, men are especially inclined to see love as something they should receive without expending effort. Fellas, no offense, but like, it's true. Like, I'm sorry, it's the hard truth. You have to hear it. Yeah, like, men have been kind of taught that love is something you receive, not something that you give, right? And ultimately, this destroys your fucking relationships, right? Because no matter how loving your girlfriend is or your wife is, she will ultimately start to resent you if you take and never give. It's really, really sad. The counter to this you get is like, well, if she really loved me unconditionally, then she wouldn't care that I never give anything back. And it's like, fellas, like, if you were in a relationship with a woman and she just took, never gave, right? Like, you know, she doesn't get you stuff for your anniversary, or she gets it, but she kind of half-asses it, right? She never helps you when you're in a tough spot. She's always unloading her emotional baggage onto you, never really listens or gives advice or comfort when you are in a tough emotional spot, right? Like, how would that make you feel? You'd start to question if this person really, you know, was really into this anymore, right? And so I think a lot of men, like, kind of have this idea that, like, women naturally just give and never want anything in return. Which, if that's the case, you need to read some books written by women, right? Like, read a little bit of what women are reading, or watch a little bit of what women are watching, right? Like, women long to have the same kind of care that we want to give, right? You know, if someone isn't giving anything in return, it's like, well, they're not loving you, right? You know, because we're treating love as an action, right? And don't worry about giving too much, right? You will know if you're in a spot where the other person isn't loving you back, right? And then it's just time to leave and move on. So, yeah, and then this goes into something that I thought was especially relevant today. This was written in 2000. Listen to this. Relationships are treated like Dixie cups. They're the same. They're disposable. If it does not work, drop it, throw it away, get another. Committed bonds, including marriage, cannot last when this is the prevailing logic, and friendships or loving community cannot be valued and sustained. This culture of cutting off toxic people and ghosting and all this shit, that is this. Like, how many people watching this have had somebody cut you off because you had one bad day? It's amazing how many people toss you to the side as soon as you express one emotional need. But this new culture of like, oh, it's emotional labor to have to give your friends support. Die, perhaps. Like, that shit is so evil. And like, I hate this idea that like your friend coming to you in a time of like great strife in their life, like needing support, means that they're toxic suddenly. Like, oh yeah, they're kind of a downer. Like, what the fuck? It's so gross. And it just, I think it's a symptom of like late stage capitalism, of treating relationships like they're disposable things that can be traded one for the other. And we can't fucking treat each other like that anymore. If we want this to get better, we can't fucking treat each other like that anymore. Everyone finds it difficult to resist the dictates of greed. Letting go of material desires may compel us to enter the space where our emotional wants are exposed, right? Like, this is why so many people in America are addicted to buying shit, right? It's because we've all got this really, really big lack in our lives. And that's the only way that we know how to fix it. This is the way the media tells us to fix it, because the people that are making our media don't fucking know either. So I'm trying to hurry along here because I've been doing this for way too long. So the next thing is community, right? So this is her next chapter. She talks a lot about issues with the nuclear family. And something I thought was interesting is that she also criticizes single parenting a little bit. And she says it's like a child should never be completely dependent on just one other person, right? And she encourages people to find godparents for their kids, right? Like, if you're a single parent, find them a godmother or a godfather, because that way, when one party is being unfair to kids, they have another person they can go to, right? Like, this is why community is so important, because when one person might let you down or might fall through a little bit, then you have another person to go to. And I think a lot of us are experiencing a huge lack of community, lately especially, but this culturally, again, 2000, this has been happening for a very long time and building for a very long time. Okay, and then she also talks about embracing solitude. She argues that when we're comfortable in our solitude, we're able to make connections with others without using them as a means of escape. So once you embrace solitude and you start getting really comfortable with yourself, and you start really gaining compassion for yourself, and you learn to enjoy your own company, and just have empathy for yourself, you start kind of making connections that actually are gonna like resonate with you more. And then she talks about mutuality. There's an interesting quote here. Much of the despair young people feel about love comes from their belief that they are doing everything right, or that they have done everything right and love is still not happening. The reason is because other people are not like video game quests. There is no formula for love, right? It is always a two-way street between you and another person, even if that other person is yourself. At least when you hold to the dynamics of power, you never have to fear the unknown. You know the rules of the power game. Whatever happens, the outcome can be predicted. The practice of love offers no place of safety. We risk loss, hurt, pain. We risk being acted upon by forces outside of our control. Yeah, so love is this very scary thing to undertake. It involves a massive amount of vulnerability. This goes back to the patriarchy thing, right? If you can't embrace vulnerability, because vulnerability forces you to relinquish your sense of power. Vulnerability really gets in the way of ego. Ego does not like vulnerability. To practice the art of loving, we have first to choose love, admit to ourselves that we want to know love and be loving even if we do not know what that means. The deeply cynical, who have lost all belief in love's power, have to step blindly out on faith. I like that she believes in the deeply cynical's ability to do that, because I used to be like a deeply cynical person, right? And every day I have to make the decision not to be like that. And it is a choice every single day, because our society embraces cynicism. And I think that's part of why we're all so miserable, honestly, because cynicism is seen as the wise choice when really it's a crippling choice. Yeah, there's another thing about like disposability of relationships here. Living in a culture where we are encouraged to seek a quick release from any pain or discomfort has fostered a nation of individuals who are easily devastated by emotional pain, however relative. When we face pain in relationships, our first response is often to sever bonds rather than maintain commitment. Part of mutuality and like mutuality in love is not severing bonds the second that you meet conflict with your partner, right? If you disagree, if you argue with somebody, a lot of people nowadays think that like the first sign of disagreement, you have to make a break for it. And obviously don't stay in it if it's like actually toxic. But just disagreeing with your partner or having an argument or something like that, or even having like an ongoing problem in the relationship doesn't necessarily mean that it needs to be discarded. Because if both parties are willing to work on it, then that bond can be maintained and even strengthened. And then she talks about selflessness and how when we practice love, we want to give more. Selfishness, a refusal to give acceptance to another, is a central reason romantic relationships fail. If you're going into a romantic relationship and you're just thinking about what you're gonna get out of it, a selfish way of looking at it, and that shit is doomed to fail. When you truly love someone, that love will show in acts of selflessness. You will want to give to that person. She goes on to say, we live in an age of narcissism and many people have never learned or have forgotten how to listen to the needs of others. The truth is, if you want to make just one change in yourself that will improve your relationship literally overnight, it would be to put your partner's interest on an equal footing with your own. So the next chapter in this is romance. So romantic love, sweet love. He talks a lot about lovelessness in relation to romantic love here. However, the more I talk with people around me, I find disappointment to be widespread, and it does lead many folks to feel profoundly cynical about love. A lot of people simply think we make too much of love. Our culture may make much of love as a compelling fantasy or myth, but it does not make much of the art of loving. Our disappointment about love is directed at romantic love. We fail at romantic love when we have not learned the art of loving. It's as simple as that. Often we confuse perfect passion with perfect love. And she talks a lot about how like actual true love, like real life true love, isn't like that magical like insta love that you see in media, in books and movies, in TV shows. Often a deeper bonding with another person, a soul connection, happens whether we will it to be so or not. Indeed, sometimes we are drawn towards someone without knowing why, even when we do not desire contact. Several couples I talked with have found true love enjoyed telling the story of how one of them did not find the other at all appealing at first meeting, even though they felt mysteriously joined to that individual. In all cases where individuals felt that they had known true love, everyone testified that the bonding was not easy or simple. To many folks, this seems confusing precisely because our fantasy of true love is that it will be just that, simple and easy. Usually we imagine that true love will be intensely pleasurable and romantic, and full of love and life. In truth, true love is all about work. And I can totally like as someone who has had true love in my life, it's like the one I'm thinking of is platonic true love, like specifically. It's like that relationship did take work, right? Like with this person, like, and it was like better because of it, right? It's not work as in like herder, I have to go to work, oh darn. Like it's more like I enjoy maintaining this bond that I have with this person, and I enjoy deepening this bond with this person. I mean, me and this person practically grew up together, right? And so because of that, we had to undergo a lot of difficult changes together. And because we were able to troubleshoot through all of those changes, we had a really, really deep bond. And that's what true love is about. It's not like this instant love like that magically happens between you and a person. Like, the magic is in you and another person mutually deciding, like, you know what, yeah, like, I want to build something with you. True love is unconditional, but to truly flourish, it requires an ongoing commitment to constructive struggle and change. The heartbeat of true love is the willingness to reflect on one's actions and to process and communicate this reflection with a loved one. No matter how often we turn our minds and hearts away, or how stubbornly we refuse to believe in its magic, true love exists. It does exist. Everyone wants it, even those who claim to have given up hope, but not everyone is ready. True love appears only when our hearts are ready. And she goes on to say most people are gonna live their whole lives without ever knowing true love. It's because they're never ready. And I think that that's been the norm for thousands of years. But if we want there to be some kind of a love renaissance, if we want to start taking steps towards cultural change about love, we have to start implementing the stuff she's talking about in here, because true love is not this magical thing that is one day gifted to us from the gods. It's something that we choose to do with another person, and that other person chooses to do with us, and that's the magic of it. To find another person that has not been brainwashed into materialism and chronic lying and ego and narcissism. To find another person that has not been brainwashed into that and is willing to build something with you, like you specifically, that shit is where the magic is at. It's not supposed to be effortless. Like, the magic is actually in the effort that it takes. Okay, and then she's got a chapter on loss, which I'm not gonna get into just in the interest of time and because I am very quickly losing daylight. And okay, and then she's got a chapter on healing. Love redeems. Despite all the lovelessness that surround us, nothing has been able to block our longing for love, the intensity of our yearning. The intensity of the yearning that most Americans are feeling right now, like the intensity of this terrible lovelessness that we feel, this in many ways is actually a good thing, okay? Because it shows that no matter how much our media fails to depict love, no matter the fact that most of us grew up loveless and continue to be chronically loveless, no matter the fact that many of us have zero experience in love, it still hasn't killed the impulse. Like, we still have this intrinsic thing within us that longs to love, and that to me says something so powerful about what humans are as a species. A lot of times the media tries to say that humans are inherently selfish and terrible and blah blah blah. This is actually an attempt to naturalize the greed and cruelty that is necessary for capitalism and imperialism and militarism to function. In actuality, humans naturally have this impulse to love, and it doesn't go away. Like, no matter how long we go without it, we don't forget about it. It never goes away. And that says something so beautiful about what we are as a species. I began thinking and writing about love when I heard cynicism instead of hope in the voices of young and old. Cynicism is the greatest barrier to love. It is rooted in doubt and despair. Fear intensifies our doubt. It paralyzes. Faith and hope allow us to let fear go. Fear stands in the way of love. If we want shit to get better, we have to let go of cynicism. We have to start being cynical about cynicism, basically. As a treat, we could have a little bit of cynicism, but we have to be cynical about cynicism. Like, I think it's important when we're thinking about cynicism, is like, why are we being cynical? Because there are times when it's healthy to have that. But cynicism about human nature and cynicism about the existence of love, cynicism about the overall good of humanity, these things paralyze us. They are not productive, they don't do anything, and, like, in my opinion, like, whatever, I'm an air sign, we're supposed to be the logical ones, right? Because it's not productive, we simply have to let that go, right? That does not do anything for us. and it certainly will not heal us. The transformative power of love is not fully embraced in our society because we often wrongly believe that torment and anguish are our natural condition. This is a very, very popular opinion right now. It is natural to want love, but the torment and anguish and chronic fear that many of us are feeling is not natural. We gotta make sure we don't naturalize that. And then she says to return to love, to know perfect love, we have to surrender the will to power. I hope that this video hasn't come across as me being like, this is how you specifically should act, right? This is not me trying to finger wag, right? But this is me speaking out because this is something I'm really, really passionate about, right? Because this resonated with me as a great summation of a large, large problem in our society at the moment. And a problem that's like impacted my life personally, and the lives of some of my closest friends. Like, this feeling of anguish, this lovelessness, has torn the lives of some people that I was very close to. It's torn them apart. Because they couldn't take it anymore. I think if we're gonna start having romantic relations, like specifically heterosexual romantic relations, I think if we want to start actually having fulfilling romantic relationships in much larger numbers, if we want the next generation to have an unprecedented number of children that grew up in loving households, right? The first step is for men to surrender the longing for power. You know, individual men can weigh whether or not that's worth it. Personally, I would say it's worth it. I'm not a man, so I can't say whether it's worth, I'm not gonna get on my knees and beg men to abandon the impulse to stomp on someone else for their own ego. But I will say that it seems highly illogical when you have a natural impulse to love, and that natural impulse to love will never be satisfied as long as you keep complying and falling in line with what patriarchy asks you to do. Like, to me, that seems like it would be an immensely alienating and uncomfortable situation. So, yeah. So, this, I highly recommend this. I think this has just really helped cement a lot of ideas that I already had about just like my own morals and like how I want to live my life and stuff like that. This helped cement that, right? Because before it was just all in my head, but now I know that there is like actual theory that those things are based in. So this book is good. It's doing a good thing. And if you feel like you are impacted by lovelessness, which I'm guessing is most people, I would highly recommend you read this. It's very accessible. It's not difficult language at all, as you probably could tell like when I was quoting it. I would say if anybody watching this has any need of a single takeaway, I would say the big thing is you have to take responsibility for cultivating love in your life, because it will not fall into place effortlessly in a society that teaches us to not love ourselves and not love other people and not be selfless, because if you're selfless, you're a sucker, right? And to not treat women like equals, to not simp for them, right? To treat being nice to your girlfriend as like it's a bad thing, basically. Shaming men for giving up the will to power, which actually is kind of a sign that you're doing something right. Like, if sexist men are like shaming you for doing something, it probably means you're actually doing something really, really right. You're one of the troublemakers that they don't like very much. Yeah, because of all of those forces in place, it will not fall into place naturally, right? And I think the biggest thing, if we want to have like a love renaissance, if we want this to be a thing that happens within our generation, we have to be brave. Like, that's the simplest thing. We have to be brave. We have to take the plunge. We have to say no to cynicism. We have to simply have faith in the effects of our own actions, right? We have to be brave enough to be the only person acting out. We have to be brave enough to trust other people enough to build something lovely with them. Whether that's a friendship or a romantic relationship or even just like a familial bond, right? And to be brave enough to actually act on our values in our day-to-day life, like the values of saying no to racism, to homophobia, to sexism, all of that stuff, to actually act on that in our day-to-day life, like make changes in what you engage with, and yeah, be brave enough to say no to popular media that whatever is not in line with your love ethic. Brave enough to love ourselves too, and to have compassion for ourselves on this journey, because it isn't easy and it isn't our fault that it's like this, but this is the world we live in, and so now we've got to decide what to do with it, right? Yeah, so that is all I wanted to do for this video. I just wanted to go through this brilliant, brilliant book. I am totally out of daylight now. You can see by how my moon has turned from an actual moon into a vaguely crescent-shaped blob. It kind of looks like a large yellow bean now, honestly. But yeah, that's all I wanted to do for this video, and I hope that if even one person takes this shit to heart, and reads the book and actually starts changing the way that they act because of it, then I will be extremely happy. So that is all for this video. I hope you're all having a lovely, lovely day. Please keep the faith. And remember that cynicism is getting us nowhere, and it's time to make change. It's time to make change, even if those changes are just happening in the way that we think when we're alone in our bedroom at night.